Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Jacob. I'm a digital outcomes specialist here at Forefront. Forefront is the company behind eShot. With me today, I have Harry, who's a digital marketing executive, who's going to be doing a demo of eShot towards the end of the training. In the chat lurking is Dee and Izzy, who are going to be answering any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, either leave it to the Q&A at the end, or stick it in the chat and we'll be able to answer your questions. So give me one moment just to switch to the right screen. So to go over the agenda today, we're going to be going over why accessibility is important. We're going to be going over color contrast, accessible text, buttons and links. I'm going to be giving you some dark mode tips. Then we're going to play a game called Is This Accessible? Where basically I'm going to ask you guys for some audience participation, where we're going to be basically saying, is this bit of content accessible, yes or no, and seeing how well you guys guess it. Then we're also going to be going over the accessibility features in eShot that Harry's going to give us a demo of, and then we'll have a Q&A. So to begin, accessibility is not optional. The Digital Inclusion Act actually states that councils must do what they can in order to create accessible content. Therefore, it's no longer optional. You need to know the basics, and in today's training, we're hopefully going to put you in the shoes of your audience so you can learn the basics a bit better. So just to confirm, everything's looking good. Slides are changing, just because we've had a few.
Yeah, all looking good. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so to start off with a question, I'm actually going to ask some audience participation to begin with, and that is, what percentage of your audience do you think has accessibility needs? And I'm just going to give you guys a few seconds to put the answers in the chat of what you think it is. Just give me a percentage out of 100 on what you think the percentage of your audience has accessibility needs. We have 25% from Emma. Thank you very much. We have 80%, 45%. Okay. Anyone else want to give a guess? We're going to have a few of these audience participation things. It'd be very interesting to see where you guys actually think. So 100%, 30%, 20%. Okay. So the answer actually is 20%. And this might be people who are visually impaired in some sort of way or suffer from dyslexia. On average, 1 in 5 people have some sort of accessibility need. That is a very large portion of your audience. That out of 1,000 people, that's 200 people on average have some sort of accessibility need. Therefore, catering towards creating more accessible content is very beneficial as more of your audience can consume it. So let's start with color contrast, as this is probably one of the most interesting ones and ones that we often need to look at the most to create accessible content for. As often you'll be grilled on your accessibility contrast ratios when creating accessible content. So in front of me, I have 4 pictures of M&Ms. These M&Ms, all of these pictures are actually identical, apart from one thing that's different in them. I'd like you guys to sort of have a think. You don't need to put answers in the chat for this one, but in your head, have a think of what is the same and what is different between each of these 4 photos. Because I'll tell you now, the positioning of the M&Ms is completely the same in every single photo. However, there's one thing that's the same and one thing that's different. And by the way, these are the main ways that people who may be visually impaired and don't see color the right way would see color. So these are the main 3 ways. However, there's no actual way of telling how an individual can see color. So there are different things we can do to design content that basically encompasses this, so you can create accessible content without knowing how the individuals see color. So if we are going to explain how this works, if you can see here, the hue of each of the M&Ms is actually different. However, the color contrast is the same. So if you see the light colors are the same in each photo. So if you look at this point here, the light color is the same, and the dark colors are the same in each photo. So if you see the darker ones, they are the same. So that is the only similarities and differences between these, which means that color contrast is actually very important in order for our audience to be able to consume the content. WCAG 2.2 guidance states that most things under 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio are good for accessibility and some things are bad, and anything under that is bad for accessibility. There are exceptions to this, such as body text, which if it's colored, it needs to be a 7:1 contrast ratio. However, in general, most things need to be a 4.5:1 contrast ratio. So if you see on the left-hand side here, we have the things that are bad for color contrast. So if you see the foreground and the background color are quite similar, they're not there's not a big stark difference between them. They are more along the sides of the same colors. This one is quite a dark color, and this one is obviously going into the lighter colors. This is very much nearly accessible, so this one is nearly there. It looks very close to being accessible. However, it would just fail that accessibility rating if you had to test it. However, these two are very not great for accessibility, very hard to see against the background, and therefore not great for accessibility. To go over in more detail, here is a contrast checker that you can actually use to make sure that you are staying accessible. Graphical objects such as buttons, spaces require a color contrast ratio of 4.5:1. Headings also require 4.5:1, have a smaller text requires a 7:1. All contrast checkers work on the same sort of variables, so it doesn't actually matter which one you use. You are just checking the contrast background color against the foreground color. Is this a tool on eShot? Yes, we have a built-in accessibility checker inside eShot, and Harry will demo that towards the end of the webinar. However, this is WebAIM's contrast checker. You can find it on Google, and it's a very quick tool that you can use to check the color contrast ratio of absolutely any content that you're creating. So let me teach you a life hack on how we can create more accessible content without it really mattering how the person can see color. Basically, we need to assume that people see color in black and white. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have different examples of different contrast ratios. This one is a low contrast ratio. This one is a low contrast ratio. However, the one in the middle is a high contrast ratio. And when we make these black and white, we basically can see that the one with the high contrast ratio is very clear. You can very clearly see it. However, with the darker ones, it's very hard to see. And this is basically how most people who may see color in different ways will see it. The colors will blend into the background, and you want to avoid that by having a high contrast ratio. Social icons. This is one that's commonly people get it wrong. Here's a quick example. Social icons are all designed to work on a white background. However, when you start changing the background, let's say your social icons are inside your footer of your email or of your website. When you change the footer's color, for example, if the background was green, you can see that the WhatsApp, Line, and WeChat suddenly start vaporizing into the background. If I had a black footer, you can see the X logo of Threads and TikTok start fading into the background. Same goes with blue, with Facebook and LinkedIn, and then with red we have the YouTube and Pinterest. Point is, you can actually make social icons accessible by recoloring them so they have a very good contrast rate, high color contrast ratio against the background that they're on. Inside eShot, you can do this automatically using the social icons block by just clicking on it, using the drop down on the side and picking from one of the presets. And it basically recolors the entire social icon set into one color, so it's one color against one background, ensuring that it's all accessible. Headings and logical reading. This one's quite important. You need to make sure you structure your hashtags correctly and in order, and you need to make sure that you read your content like a screen reader would. Typically, people don't actually do this correctly, and I would like to show you an example of a correct H1, H2, and H3 structure. You don't actually want to be doing, oh, this is my first heading, this is my second heading, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, like commonly I see people do. You actually want to sort of do it more like these Russian doll folders type thing, where, as you can see, animals by breed is my top sort of folder, I'd say. And then you have the dogs, cats, and horses, which are the subcategories. And then the subcategories of these would be the actual breeds themselves. And this is the way you should use hashtags. It's very good for screen readers to understand how the content is structured. And also it's great for when you have different heading appearance settings saved for different headings to instantly populate, and the sizes and colors be correct straight away. You have appearance settings in Smart Editor, by the way, where you can configure how different headings appear as soon as you set them. And yeah, obviously in Smart Editor, here's a quick show off. You can select which heading is which by just selecting on the heading and clicking from the dropdown. Right, now with this one, I want you to have a quick guess on how many people, what percentage of your audience, let's do out of 100 again, or out of 10, how many people do you think suffer from dyslexia? So this means that they struggle with close together content, with larger amounts of content, it's a bit harder to read. What percentage of your audience do you think has dyslexia? Because it's actually very important to create content that everyone can read, and incorporating how many people that might struggle to read some content is very important. Okay, it's 2 out of 10, 25%, 35%, 3 out of 10, 60%, 40s. All right, thank you very much, everybody, for answering. The answer actually is 1 in 10, so it's actually slightly lower. However, still a very large percentage of your audience. We'll get to reading age a little bit later, and that is a little bit different. However, people that suffer from dyslexia is a bit closer to 10%, depending on the source that you look at. Here is an example of a typical email that quite commonly might come across an email that looks like this. From a design standpoint, it uses images, it has colored headings, bold headings, it has quite good design hierarchy and decent content. However, it's very close together, and I actually ran a live test on this. So my girlfriend suffers from dyslexia, and so does my sister. And when I designed these slides a few years ago, I actually showed them this exact email and basically said, "What do you think?" And to my surprise, they visually got stressed out. And after getting the sort of explainer on why so, they told me that it's very close together and it just gets a bit confusing. It just looks like a lot of text. It's very overwhelming, is what I basically got told. And the email on the right-hand side is the same exact email, but all I've done is just added a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of padding. And I just wanted you guys to see how much better that looks. And all you've done is just added 10, 20 pixels to each item in the email. It's much easier to understand, it's much easier to read, it looks a lot better, and 100% of your audience are going to appreciate this sort of look as compared to the look on the left. And in eShot, most things have padding settings. You can very easily just click on image blocks, different structures, text blocks, and add padding to absolutely anything, and that make your email look a lot better. So alt text, a very important one that we often need to look at. What is it actually used for? We all know that alt text is used for screen readers. Basically, a screen reader reads through an image. It can't actually see an image, so it reads what's meant to be there, and that's the text that we set. There's some platforms out there that auto set text based on what's in the image. However, in most scenarios, you have to type in your exact text, and that actually allows us to be quite specific with what's there. Because alt text is actually very useful not only for screen readers, but also for search engines. If you're specific with what's there, you'll see that when you type in some email-related things, eShot actually often comes up. The blog headers that we have come up often inside Google Images. That's because we set alt text on all our images, and the search engines actually pick up on that. And then also broken images. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a blocked email. I'm assuming you've seen them often, where the content in the email is blocked and you can't see any of the images in an email. Or your internet's just bad and images aren't loading properly. Alt text helps to basically say this content is meant to be there, and it's very helpful to make sure that your audience can consume the content that's meant to be there if they have any of the broken images issues, or if they are in fact using a screen reader. And obviously everything that basically can have alt text, it has alt text in Smart Editor. You can just click on images, links, videos, and set your alt text. I actually want to say you make sure to have descriptive alt text, because normal alt text that's just there for the sake of it isn't good enough. We need to be descriptive of our alt text. We need to say exactly what's there. And I'll give you a good example. So let's say I am designing a PDF for the World Fishing Championships, and on every single picture, every single page, there's a picture of a fish, and the alt text just says fish or large fish or fish core. That alt text on every single page would basically end up being useless, as all it just tells me is that there's a picture that is sort of expected to be there, like some sort of fish there, sure, nice. It's not descriptive enough. However, if you were to put in the alt text, this is a 200 kilo pike caught in this area, and it won the first place championship, suddenly that alt text becomes much more useful, much more readable, and once again, if there's broken images or if someone's using a screen reader, they know exactly what's meant to be there. It's very useful to your audience to provide that alt text as compared to doing something that's quite basic, because you can actually have a downgrading effect with very basic alt text. You don't want to have repetitive, boring alt text. Keep it descriptive and let your audience know what's there. So buttons are king. 44 to 72 pixels is the average size of a thumb on a mobile device, which means it's much easier to click a button than it is to click hyperlinked text. So as you see here, hyperlinked text, let's say I had some text inside the body of my email and I said it was hyperlinked, it's harder to click it. But if you have a very large button taking up multiple lines, not only it draws the person's attention, it's also easier to click. And that's why they actually have a higher click-through rate. So I very much recommend it. Do use buttons wherever possible, but there is no problems with hyperlinking body text as long as the body text is accessible. So make sure it's 7:1 contrast ratio. Maybe make it bold to make it easier to click and more accessible again. But yeah, use buttons where possible. And here is some more examples of descriptive buttons. Don't say read more, learn more, visit here. It doesn't tell the user at all where the button is going. However, saying something like browse campsites, read our full mission, sign up for our webinar on our website is very descriptive as to where the button is going and very useful to your audience. Suddenly, when you have multiple buttons in an email, let's say an email has 10 buttons in it or 5 buttons in it, if every single button says button visit here, imagine that's what your screen reader was saying. Your screen reader just goes button visit here, bit of text button visit here. It's much better if each of the buttons are very unique to what the button is doing and where the button's taking you. Hyperlinks. So there is a good way and a bad way of doing hyperlinks. Don't post unclickable links. That's a basic one. But the click here is the more common usage. Click here isn't good because once again, it's not descriptive enough. Very similar to how buttons work. Hyperlinking the exact text that basically acts like the button that takes the users to the page. Hyperlinking descriptive text is much more clear. It shows a higher amount highlighted in the text. If you hyperlink half a line of text, like you see here, it's much easier to click than the 2 words over here. And yeah, make sure that if it's text this size, 7:1 contrast ratio is very important. Also, a very important one is an eShot. You can actually preview how your email will look on over 40 different email clients. This is the email forensics feature that you'll see under the, I believe, analytics feature after you've sent out a test email or a live campaign. And you can see how your email looks in all the different devices, dark mode, and yeah, basically every kind of rendering client that is commonly used. All right, so talking of dark mode, let's show you some emails. So obviously, most emails flip in dark mode. Smart as the emails automatically flip the major parts into dark mode, and you can actually it's important to preview this to make sure you see how things do look when they do flip. As you can see here, the My Company is completely vaporizing into the background when it goes into dark mode, which obviously is not ideal. However, some other logos that work good on white backgrounds and dark backgrounds, such as the Google logo, sort of are still there. They still kind of fade a little bit, but still there. However, if your logo ends up looking like this, then you really need to do something about it. So let me teach you a life hack that you can do. Here is Forfarshire County Council. And as you can see, when it's a white background on a dark, when it's a dark background on and a white foreground, it's very clear to see. However, when it dark mode flips, it's very hard to see suddenly. But if we were to put a white outline around our logo, as you can see that when it's on a dark background, it's very easy to still see it. But then if it's on a white background, the white outline disappears. So that same logo, even though the actual logo image isn't changing, works on both background types and is clear and accessible. So that's just a very easy life hack you can apply to your logos to make sure that they're easy to see. Right, let's play a game and let's test how well I've taught you things today. Would using a logo with a set background fix this, as in not a PNG? Yes. However, then that background wouldn't flip in dark mode. So you might end up in a scenario where you have a massive block of like massive white block with a logo on top of it, and then the background around that white block will turn dark. That might look a bit strange. If it looks cool, it might look cool. Depends on how you sort of set up the email. No problem at all. Right, so let's play a game. It's called Is This Accessible or Not? So I'm gonna pop up a logo and a background on the screen and ask you guys if it's accessible. Just simple yes or no answers, and you can basically, you could even guess what contrast ratio it is. However, what do we think? Is this accessible? Yes or no? Just pop some answers in the chat. We have about 7 of these to get through, and I think it's gonna be very interesting to see what you guys think. So we have a bunch of yeses. Okay, very good. And you guys will be correct. We started off easy. Of course. Yes, this is accessible. Looks great. White logo against the background. Very clear, easy to see. Contrast ratio 6.0 to 1. So we're only aiming for 4.5 to 1. And now this one, if it was a salmon color. No. Okay, really very simple one. You guys are good at this. Good. We've got the basics covered then. Make it a little bit harder then. This one. What do we think? Accessible or not? Bunch of yeses. You guys are unified. This is great. Okay. I've never had this much of a unified answers when doing these, and I believe it's the 5th session we've done. Correct. You guys are correct. It is a contrast ratio of a 5.14 to 1. So that is very close to the 4.5. However, it's still accessible and good. Right. Yeah, a little bit harder, squeezing those numbers a little bit more, and unified no's again. I'm in shock. You guys are great at this. Good, we're running through this. No. Okay. What do we think? We have a lovely pink background. It's a strong pink on this one, though. But even though it's bright, it's a very deep, strong pink. We have one no that turns to a yes, and then we have one no, and then a bunch of yeses. Okay, so actually, no, it is not. Color contrast ratio on this is 4.45 to 1, which means it would be about 1% off. I know that's me being cheeky. However, it's very close to not being accessible. You'd nearly get away with this. You need to change it by literally 1 shade. And then this would be over 4.5 to 1, and it would pass WCAG standards. Right. Here we actually have a gradient. So I don't know if it's how clear it is on each of your monitors. However, we start off with a darker red around here and end off with a lighter red around here. What do we think? Yes, no, 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 no. Okay, so a few yeses and a lot of no's. Actually, it is accessible, and I'll explain on why with this one. The contrast ratio on this is 8.45 to 1 to a range of 5.98 to 1. So what do we learn here? Basically, the darkest point of this gradient, which is over here, has this contrast ratio. And the lightest point of this gradient over here has this contrast ratio. Both of these being accessible by WCAG standards. Therefore, in this scenario, this is actually accessible. It is very unique scenario that you have a logo and a gradient. However, it's still very important to understand if it's accessible or not. This one is also a gradient. This one goes from top down and is bluey turquoise color. Okay, a bunch of no's on this one. Got a few more people thinking. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys take a think. And we have a yes and a bunch of no's. Okay, another yes. Cool. So, answer is nope, it is not. 6.45. So it starts out accessible up here, and then it would not be around here. So as soon as the color starts getting lighter, the bottom half of this logo basically would not be considered accessible. It starts to fade into the background too much, and it would not be accessible. So that's it for my game, and basically it for me. I kind of wanted to end this off by saying put yourselves in the shoes of others. It's really important to understand how your audience sees the content that you're showing them, and putting yourselves in their shoes basically makes it much easier to understand that. So read your content like a screen reader would, check your alt text, and you'll realize you will end up learning these accessibility things, and whenever you spot someone not doing it, you start getting annoyed at it yourself. You'd be like, use a descriptive button and things like that. So we have assets to actually help you out as well. So we have an email accessibility checklist. Is there a color contrast checker tool in eShot? Yep. I'm about to hand over to Harry, who's going to do a demo of the accessibility features within eShot, so we can show you all the goods we have in our platform. We also have the Sculpt is also a nice little framework that I would recommend taking a screenshot of. Just remember these things whenever you're creating content, and your content will end up being accessible, hopefully. Take a screenshot. We also have a bunch of blogs on our blog that help you with accessibility. We really recommend reading those. And then now, yeah, over to Harry. So thank you very much from my end, everybody. And now Harry, some of eShot's accessibility features.
Yep, cool. Is my screen coming through? You should be seeing eShot.
Yep.
Cool. So I'm just going to jump into a design that I've set up here. And yeah, I'm going to touch on a few of the points that Jacob's already covered, but sort of just cover how you can set those up in eShot. So to start, we'll start with an easy one, the alt text. So at the top here, I've obviously got the Forefront logo, which if I click onto that there, on the right-hand side, I've set my alt text to the Forefront logo. Obviously, that is very simple to set alt text for a logo. It's just whatever your company's called, and then logo after, or sort of whatever you fancy. Whereas this image down here, where we've got a email design popping out of a laptop, it's a bit more hard to describe. So if I click on here, I've actually set the alt text to an eShot on a laptop screen with the email design popping out of the laptop. So it's a lot more descriptive. So if you couldn't actually see that image, it's telling you what is there. And scroll down a bit further now, and we'll touch on headings. So I've used the same example that Jacob used earlier. So we've gone with the animals by breed. So my heading 1, if I click on this here, and you see up in the top left corner, it's set to a heading 1 and the size of 28. And then our subcategory of the animals by breed is dogs. So if I click onto here, it's set as a heading 2, and it's a slightly less in size. And then a little bit further down again, we've got different types of dog breeds, which if I click onto these, it's set to a heading 3, and again, a smaller font. And all 3 of these are set as heading 3. So as Jacob said, it's sort of like that Russian doll structure. You've got your top one, and then you've got your content within that, and then you've got your sub-content again. Obviously, you might not always have 3 headings within one topic, but it always go from heading 1 to 2 to 3 where applicable. And scrolling down a bit further again, we'll touch on social icons. And so you saw the quick clip in Jacob's slides, but on here you can see my Facebook and LinkedIn logos aren't accessible on this blue footer color that I've got. So if I just click onto my icons here, and again on the right hand side, I can change the size first off, but I can also change the logo's color. So we can, depending on obviously what footer color you've got, you can change them to black. But obviously in my scenario here, I would go with white logos. And then if I change the size back down, so then all of these are accessible on my footer color. And finally, to answer the question about the accessibility checker tool, you'll see within my design here, I've labeled a few elements as inaccessible. So you've got an inaccessible button, inaccessible heading. And we've got some labeled as accessible button there, inaccessible button. So eShot actually checks this for you. To do so, once you finish with the design, click the preview button at the top. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this page with previewing your designs once you've finished with them. But you might not know, over on the right-hand side, we've got this accessibility tab. So I'm just going to open that up. And you can see here, eShot's actually telling me that I've got 5 WCAG AA color contrast fails, which is all well and good. But obviously, if I didn't label these myself, how would you know what they are? So over on the right-hand side, we've got the highlight button. And upon clicking that on my email, the red box will be put around all elements which don't pass. So these 5 instances here, if I scroll through, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Which again is all well and good, but then you need to go about fixing these issues. So again, on the right-hand side, we've got this little details link, which I'm just going to open up. And this will open up your color contrast checker. So what I'm going to do for this example is just jump back to my design, copy my blue color, go back to the checker. And if I paste in the hex for this blue, we'll again see obviously it fails. So what I'm going to do is just drag the slider to get as close as possible. That actually passes all elements. So now we can see it passes small text for AA and all other elements. So then I'm just going to copy this hex value again, jump back to my design, and change the text color to that new blue. And I'll also do it for one of the buttons as well. Make sure that design's saved, and I'll jump back to my preview. And back to accessibility again, and we'll see now the instances has dropped to 3. So if I click the highlight button, my first one is now that link. So the button at the top there and this heading are now accessible. So essentially, once you've finished completing your design or during, it's always handy to preview, check that accessibility tab, and the key one to check for are the WCAG AA color contrast issues. And finally, from within eShot, Jacob covered the email forensics tool. So just going to come out of my design and show you that. So yes, it is under Analytics, Email Forensics, and I've loaded one already for this. So we'll see here, you can jump to the preview section for any of your test or live emails that you've sent, and you can load the previews for different clients, different devices. So just to click on a few, obviously we've got Microsoft Outlook, and then obviously, your sort of iPhone devices, so it shows you what it looks like on a mobile device. And then finally, we've got the dark mode previews. So we can see how I've put that white background on that logo, so it still shows, slightly different to Jacob's example. But you can see how all your content would look when it is flipped on dark mode. So yeah, that's all for the eShot tools. Obviously, the most important one is the color contrast checker. It's a fairly new feature. We released it last year, so you may not all know about it, but it's definitely one to check out. So yeah, we'll open the floor to any questions now.